Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for joining us. What you'll see on your screen is actually a SharePoint site. And we decided that we couldn't really do a SharePoint webinar without using SharePoint. So that's exactly what we've done. So what you'll see is that we've created a site that holds all of the assets for today's webinar and for the future webinars the next 4 weeks. As I say, it's to show you we practice what we preach. It's all done using SharePoint Online, which is either part of Office 365 or a standalone monthly subscription. So we could be presenting from anywhere. We could be presenting from a train. If it's got a Wi-Fi connection, we could be presenting from anywhere in the world. We're not tied to an office because it's Office 365 and it's fully mobile. It's wherever we want to be. We've used SharePoint, the SharePoint site to develop and collaborate material around SharePoint, so you can see a timeline and you can see the assets that we've created in a document library. So what we're going to do now is launch the presentation that we're going to run through to start today's webinar off, which hopefully will come through onto your screen. You should see that it's PowerPoint Online. And here we go. So you'll see from what we cover today that SharePoint really is the most versatile technology you'll come across, as we've already started to demonstrate. We use the Swiss Army knife because everybody knows the Swiss Army knife. It's all about what do you need it to do. You can use it to take stones out of a horse's hoof. You can open a bottle of wine with it. Whatever it is you want to do, you can do it with a Swiss Army knife. And from a technology point of view, SharePoint is very much the same. So before we go any further, what I'm going to do now is just do a couple of introductions. I'm delighted to be joined by Tony Hughes, who has been working with SharePoint for 14 years. In fact, he's been working with it since its inception. And Tony has been the brains behind some of TSG's most complex and successful deployments. My name's Stephen Green, and I'm here to make sure everything runs smoothly today, and I'll be looking out for any questions you might have for Tony. So without further ado, let's move swiftly on. I mentioned earlier that this is the first in a series of 5 webinars, all at the same time on a Thursday morning for the next 5 weeks. In each of these webinars, Tony will take a closer look at some of the ideas and areas that we cover today, and he'll also build a relevant demo solution each week. So you'll get a deeper insight into what we really mean by compliance, workflow, forms, mobility, and so on and so forth. And we really would encourage you to bring colleagues along, or to encourage colleagues that these webinars might be relevant for, to come and join us, to register for the webinar, and to find out more about what we're doing. As far as today's webinar is concerned, we'll have a look at what we hope you'll take away. We'll move on to cover how SharePoint has evolved, a little bit of the history, and explain about how it's reached where it is today and what you're going to see in terms of the demo today. And then we'll look at some specific examples before Tony actually moves on and does a brief demonstration. So what are we looking to achieve today? Well, essentially, it's about getting you to think about how you can apply SharePoint in your business. It's not about technology. It's about thinking, how can you look at the way your business operates? How can you look at the way your people go about their tasks on a daily basis? How could you make life more simple, more structured? How can you make sure that people do the things that they need to do? The 3 I's, the SharePoint 3 I's. We want you to think about the issues that you've got within your business. What's holding you back? What challenges are presenting, problems for your staff? What could you be doing better? We also want you to use your imagination. Don't necessarily look at what you see today and think it has to be replicated in exactly the same way. Try and apply it to your context. Try and apply some of the principles that we're going to go through and work out how they might fit into your particular business. And the most important thing today is think about improvement, because SharePoint is about business improvement. It's about looking at your processes and working out how you can do things better, more effectively, more efficiently, taking risk out of your business. And at the end of today, or maybe at the end of SharePoint month, and I hope some of you will join us for today and the next 4 webinars, You'll wonder how you manage to do whatever it might be without a SharePoint solution in place. And on that note, I will hand across to Tony, who will talk a little bit about the history of SharePoint and take you through some examples.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Stephen, for that introduction. Okay, so what is Microsoft SharePoint? It's actually a really sort of difficult question to answer because SharePoint, it's not a simple concept to explain because it's not just one thing. What I mean by that is Microsoft provides SharePoint basically as a platform which you use to build applications for the business. You can't go out and buy SharePoint for professional services or SharePoint for education or SharePoint for construction. There is only one version of SharePoint, and you then mold the application to your business requirements. Sorry, just give me one moment because my slides aren't moving forward. My technical colleague Will is stepping in. Sorry about this, just give us one moment. Okay. So, if at all possible, on your right-hand side you'll see the option for a poll. We're just going to launch the poll. Okay. And if possible, if you could just answer that poll, one of the 3 questions, just so we get an idea of the audience as to whether you're currently users of SharePoint. Okay, so we'll just give a couple of seconds because they're now coming through. Okay, right, so everyone's voted, and interestingly we've got basically a 50-50 split. Well, 60-40 now, so we've got 60% who say no, we don't use SharePoint, and 41 who say yes, but we probably don't use it to its full advantage. Okay, so let's move on. That's an interesting start. So a little bit about SharePoint, where it's evolved from, etc. SharePoint was actually launched in 2001 by Microsoft, and it's now in its 5th version. And it was actually Microsoft's fastest application to reach 1 billion annual license revenues. That's quite a staggering figure. But it's even more staggering when you consider there's also a free version of SharePoint called Microsoft Foundation, which would add to that amount of licenses. And on average, Microsoft state that there's about 20,000 new users added to SharePoint each day. But what you've got to do is bear in mind there that a lot of these, in effect, SharePoint users will be people who are adopting Office 365, of which SharePoint is a component of that. So why might you want to use Microsoft SharePoint? There's a number of things. It's about sharing knowledge. A lot of people will store files and data on their C drives or on USB pens, etc., etc. Okay, so they're not sharing that knowledge and information. SharePoint gives you a platform where you can centralize and better share information. That leads on to improved teamwork. So where we've got people working on projects or wanting to share information, it gives us a centralized area which we can do that in a controlled manner. When we're talking about a controlled manner, that includes sort of permissions, version control of documents, etc. That then leads itself into maintaining compliance in the business. Most organizations nowadays will have a quality management system, or you'll be ISO 9001 accredited, etc. SharePoint is a fantastic platform to help you manage those processes, and that will be something which we'll be covering next week when we're looking at control freaks. And we can achieve efficiencies. Let's look at a simple example of a holiday request. A lot of organizations do that using paper-based processes, so You fill in a holiday form, you hand it to your manager, he puts it to the bottom of the pile on his list of things to do. He then spills his coffee over it, and it's a very disjointed process, and if you're really lucky you might actually get away with a holiday which never gets recorded because he never gets around to approving it. And then we can move on to support for mobility. As Stephen touched on earlier on today, we're actually using SharePoint to run these seminars, so we can be doing it from anywhere. Okay, but also as part of the Office 365 environment, we've got things like OneDrive. So that allows us to sync documents which are in SharePoint and make them available offline. Okay, or any combination of the above. You know, the thing with SharePoint is that it's an application which you can evolve over a period of time, adding new functionality and adding new applications. So what's some of the terminology you might hear as we go through this morning and in the follow-on webinars? We talk about collaboration. What we basically mean by collaboration is getting people to work better, getting them to work in a more joined up manner, and getting them to work off one version of the truth. So a centralized area for project information, departmental information, etc. Document management. Now, document management to one person can be completely different to document management to another. When we're talking about document management in SharePoint, we're talking about version control, approval, audit, etc. But what we can also do is manage documentation in other formats. So an example might be scanning in delivery notes, which we receive, you know, from our delivery drivers, or contracts which we receive which have been signed by the client. We can scan those documents into SharePoint, and SharePoint will use optical character recognition on PDF files and TIFF files to make those contents searchable. And that will be something which I'll be showing you a little bit later this morning. Data management. I suppose the easiest way to think about data management is Excel on steroids. A lot of organizations use Excel spreadsheets to capture data, whether it be things like customer complaints or customer details. We can use SharePoint's data management to turn those applications into more database-driven applications. Forms is in effect SharePoint's method and terminology around capturing data. So we can have a form to capture a customer complaint, we can have a form to capture a health and safety incident, etc., etc. And then underpinning that is workflow. If we're using SharePoint's data management facilities, we can use a workflow to route that information to the relevant people in the business. So a really simple example of that is a holiday request, where we fill in a SharePoint form to request some holiday. We use a workflow to notify that person's manager and request approval or rejection of that. And finally, sites. Sites is basically the structure of SharePoint. It allows us to create different areas in the SharePoint environment for different departments, e.g. human resources, finance, sales and marketing, etc. But they could also be project sites, they could be product sites, etc. And sites act as our first point of security, so we can grant users access rights to different areas. We can give them different permissions, whether there might only be a read-only or whether there might be have full edit rights. So for example, if I was a HR director, I might be able to go into my HR area on SharePoint and edit and update information. But if I go into the health and safety area, I might only be able to read it. So that's one way we can use permissions. So if you get really excited about SharePoint today, which I hope you will, and you trot off to Google and type in SharePoint and you go to the Microsoft site, unfortunately Microsoft quite often presents you with a wheel which I refer to as a Microsoft SharePoint wheel of confusion, because they talk about things like communities, insights, composites. And to, you know, Mr. Joe Public, that probably doesn't mean anything. What we're going to do today is strip away that Microsoft terminology and confusion and talk about the real components of SharePoint and what you can achieve with them. So what can SharePoint replace? Well, it can replace expensive bespoke applications. Okay. Using SharePoint allows us to centralize a lot of applications using common Microsoft technologies, which gives us a standard platform. It reduces the risk in the business, etc., etc. Because in effect, going forward, any update, any upgrade requirements, any update requirements are really in the hands of Microsoft. If we develop applications using Microsoft best practice around SharePoint, then once built going forward, they should remain stable and they should be easy to upgrade. Unsupported applications is another example where maybe you're stuck with an application because your current server environment means that you can't upgrade to a more later version. So in effect, that application, often by the vendors, turns around to be unsupported. Many fragmented off-the-shelf solutions where, you know, a business has thought, right, we need an application to fix this. They'll go to a software development house and they'll develop an application. And then they say, right, we want another application to fix another problem, and so on and so on. So all of a sudden you end up having an estate of technology using different platforms, etc. And often homemade solutions as well, where organizations develop applications in-house. The scary thing around this is a lot of these applications, you know, have been developed by people who are no longer with the business. So they're unsupported, or if that person, you know, decides to retire and move on, etc., etc. And these can also be classed as sort of legacy coding nightmares. Unstructured processes, okay? I've put at the bottom here in brackets, PS, email isn't a business process, okay? A lot of people run processes via email, but that's not a process, that's just a communication. There's no structure behind it, there's no audit trail, etc. Okay? As we've discussed previously, paper-based and manual processes, clunky spreadsheets, or maybe just frustration at the fact that you've got nothing in place to manage a particular process. And why is that important? Well, deploying SharePoint, you know, helps you reduce risk. Okay, it's as critical as a business process improvement. And Microsoft is pretty stable. You know, hopefully they're never going to go bust. And SharePoint is fully supported and integrated. And our approach to SharePoint implementations is compiled code as a last resort. We don't want to have to write a compiled application to make your process run inside SharePoint, because in effect that's defeating the object of making it a stable platform, easy to upgrade, etc. It's also fully integrated. Okay, so if you're using other Microsoft applications such as Microsoft Dynamics, you know, ERP solutions like NAV, CRM, SharePoint doesn't only integrate with those applications. SharePoint and these applications are designed to work together. So for instance, one example of that is Microsoft Dynamics CRM integrates with SharePoint so that any documentation, physical documents you want to store against customers and projects in CRM are actually stored in SharePoint. Okay. There's also a range of complementary tools such as Nintex Workflow and Forms, and that's something which will be shown over some of the seminars going forward. But we can also integrate with non-Microsoft ERP systems. So basically any ERP application which is running a SQL database or an Oracle database, we can actually integrate SharePoint into that. And such examples are things like using SharePoint for purchase order requests and approvals, where the actual request for the purchasing of goods and the approval is all done within the SharePoint environment. But once that is completed, we can take that data and put it into the ERP solution as a fully approved purchase order. And one thing at the bottom there we'll mention is a beta application currently from Microsoft called Project Sienna. And what Project Sienna is a framework where you can build Windows 8 applications to link data together. And you can deliver those to the desktop. So an example of that might be building a Project Sienna application for use by mobile engineers, where you want to present with them in a straightforward graphical manner technical data sheets, best practices, etc. But those technical data sheets and best practice information might be held in SharePoint, or it might be held on supplier websites, etc. We can bring all those together in a simple Windows 8 application. So what we're going to look at, well, going forward, we're going to be looking at how SharePoint can help us with teamwork, compliance, search, and then just give you some examples about how it's being used by manufacturing, construction, public sector, etc., etc. So teamwork, okay, so a lot of the time we want to try and centralize information across projects and teams. SharePoint is a fantastic platform to do that, okay. And with Office 365 we can also incorporate external users in that as well, so people who are not employed by our organization. So if you think about the concept of a firm of architects, they might create a site in SharePoint to centrally manage and store the documentation around an office development, etc. We can invite other members of the project team from external organizations, so we can invite the mechanical and electrical contractor, the civil contractor, etc., etc. But importantly, we don't have to buy licenses for those users. So we can also create sites for our top 10 customers and share information with those via SharePoint as well, in an absolutely secure manner, so they can't get into our company assets or different areas. Compliance, like I mentioned earlier, most organizations will have some form of ISO accreditation or quality management system. And SharePoint is a great platform to manage all the documentation around that and also the processes which support it. And one recent project we did was to build for the Outward Bound Trust a SharePoint environment to help them, more importantly, gain ISO 9001 accreditation and then manage that process going forward. Search and insight. We can use SharePoint as a knowledge base environment, so we can store reference articles, documentation, previous tenders we've authored, etc. So we can search that information and maybe use it as a start point for a new tender we're going to do. A project we've completed recently was for the Home Group, which is the UK's largest housing association, and we developed a knowledge management solution for their customer services department, which is open 24 hours a day and manned by approximately 100 members of staff. They can now better manage inbound calls because I have all the relevant information easily to hand. So if somebody calls up and says my fence is blown down, then they can go through guided questions, which at the end of it will determine what the correct outcome is, whether they log a maintenance call internally, whether they get an external contractor, etc., etc. In the education environment, Microsoft are very, very keen to push SharePoint into the virtual learning environment sector, so that in effect they're catching their audience from a very, very early age. So my children who go to a school in County Durham, their virtual learning environment is Microsoft SharePoint, so they have areas for different parts of the curriculum. They can post questions to their teachers, etc. But more importantly, I can log in externally as a parent and find out if any of my children do have homework tonight, so I can drag them away from their Xbox. I use the word Xbox because obviously we're on a Microsoft seminar, but they actually use PlayStations. Not something I'll get involved with. But we have another school as well who are using SharePoint to manage the process of organizing external trips and parties, etc. So they will use SharePoint to make sure they've gone through all the relevant risk assessments, whether they've sent letters out to the parents of the children involved, are there any medical conditions they need to be aware of, etc., etc. and also manage certain HR functions such as holiday requests, sickness, absence, etc. In the professional services world, we see a lot of knowledge management solutions developed by SharePoint and document management solutions. How do we manage our policies such as money laundering, new employee take-on, etc., etc. In manufacturing, as you would expect, we see we develop a lot of quality management systems. We ensure ISO compliance. We also tend to do a lot of project management sites as well, and general version control of documentation and workflow processes. So things like how do we record a non-conformance on the shop floor, how do we record hazards and risks, etc. In the construction industry, very similar things. You're probably starting to see a trend towards the major uses of SharePoint around sort of document management. How do we manage training records? We developed an application for a large construction company in the UK who specialise in asbestos removal. Now, the employees who are actually doing the removal have to be certified at 6-month and 12-month intervals for different types of tooling they use and applications. So we've developed a system which notifies the training department when somebody's certificate is going to expire, so they can take the necessary steps in advance, so they know that if they send somebody on a 4-week contract to remove asbestos from a building, that the certificate is going to be valid right through that contract. They don't want to have to take an employee off and put somebody else on. In engineering services, again, a lot of document management, a lot of business intelligence, and a lot of quality and safety management. We've just completed a project for a global oil organization based out of Aberdeen. We're very proud of this project. So it's actually going to be a Microsoft video case study where we've built a process management system integrated with all the relevant documents, so that no matter where anybody is in the world in any of their locations, whether they're in South America, whether they're in Africa or Europe or North America, has access to the latest process information, the latest quality information, etc., etc. Okay, so that's enough of PowerPoint. Personally, I hate PowerPoint, but we have to do that. I'm just being kicked by Stephen under the table, but we'll move on. So let's go back to SharePoint. Let's have a look at a few examples. Okay. What I'm going to start off with is just basically some typical examples of SharePoint. And everything we'll sort of see in the next 10 or 15 minutes is just used in standard SharePoint functionality. There's nothing special here. There's no third-party application sitting in the background. Yeah. So what I want to start off with is just, it might seem strange, it's just a little bit around search. Okay. I talked earlier about how we can use SharePoint, around document management, and also about scanning information. What I'm going to do is just in the top right here on the search bar, is I'm just going to type in dry 022. Okay. And that's coming away and it's saying, well, within your system you've got a PDF file called document bracket 1 bracket point 2. Okay. What's happened is when I've scanned that document and I've put it into SharePoint, because it's a text searchable PDF, SharePoint has done optical character recognition and made all that content searchable. So I've actually clicked to view that document. Okay, I'll open it and say, well, it's a delivery note from one of our clients, and the reference supplied by their client was dry 022. Okay. To me, this is astounding that we've got an online application which provides this sort of search functionality to allow us to quickly get to information. So you can see also on this document we've got a code here, BLK 93019. If I do a similar thing, so BLK 93019, 019, and search, it's going to bring back the same document. Okay, so basically anything on that document is content searchable. Okay, so the other thing to realize with this as well is that the search application also adheres to my SharePoint permissions. So if I don't have the rights to see this document, it just would not appear in the search results. And it's not only documents which are content searchable in SharePoint, it's all the data we put in there as well. Okay, so search is a major part of SharePoint.
Unmuted.
Tony, I'm going to quickly stop you there. As you flipped over to your Office 365 site, your SharePoint site in Office 365, we just got a question in from one of the delegates asking, is Office 365 necessary for running SharePoint?
No, you can use SharePoint as an on-premise environment. Okay, you can have SharePoint Foundation, which is free of charge. So basically, all the users in the organization who have computer logons or network accounts have the rights to use SharePoint Foundation. So it can be deployed on-premise. The thing to remember there, though, is that you have to make sure you have a suitable server to run it on. And also you would need SQL Server as well in order to run that.
And am I right in thinking, Tony, that it is available as a standalone subscription-based online product as well?
Yes. You don't have to buy Office 365 to get SharePoint in the cloud. You can just buy what's called SharePoint Online. There's two versions, Plan 1 and Plan 2, which give you different levels of functionality. But what we're actually using today, Stephen, is SharePoint Online. Although it's saying this is Office 365, I haven't got on here all the downloadable versions of Office, and I haven't got Exchange, etc., etc. So it can form part of a hybrid deployment.
Okay, yeah, no, and it's part of what Microsoft see as their Office 365 family, but you can buy that in all sorts of different ways.
Yeah.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thanks very much, Tony. Sorry about that. I'll let you crack on.
That's all right. Okay, so here's just a little example of a typical use of SharePoint. Here's a human resources site inside SharePoint. So what I'm basically presenting to the user here is along the top I'm saying my annual leave. Now SharePoint knows who you are when you log in. So at the top right hand corner it's saying Tony Hughes. So it's showing me my annual leave. So I can see I've got 26 days. I've taken one. I've got 25 available. Okay, and I'll show you how we do that in a moment. I'm also giving the user and saying, well, here's all of our approved policies. Okay, so I know if I go to SharePoint and I want to know what the latest relevant to me smoke-free policy is, I know that this is the latest published and approved version of that policy. How I know that is that in the background, if I click on approved policies, okay, I'm managing these policies inside SharePoint. Okay, so I might have on it a next review date. So whoever's managing these policies, we can use workflows to notify them this policy needs reviewing, and we can start that process. And all these policies have an approval status of approved. Okay, so we can sort of present documentation and information, etc. If I want to view that policy, then I can just click on it, and it'll just view the policy. Okay. All right, I've also got an annual leave calendar on here as well. So if I wanted to take some leave, okay, then on the right hand side here I've just got a little leave request button. Okay, what that actually does is in effect is launch a SharePoint form. Okay, so it's saying, well, why do you want to be on holiday? So we'll say, right, we want to go to the golf day in Leeds. Okay, when do I want to be off? We'll say, well, I want to be off on Wednesday the 29th from 9 o'clock to the 29th at say 1700, and I'm going to request 1 day. Now this is a fairly simple version of a holiday request system. Others we develop automatically calculate the number of days across weekends, etc., etc. So a couple of things are going to happen here. just below here, if you see pending annual leave request, there's currently nothing in there. If I just hit save, then now under pending annual leave request, it's saying you've got a pending annual leave. Now, just for demo purposes, I also approve my own holidays. Okay, so we'll run through that process. One thing just to note, at the left-hand side of the name Tony Hughes here.
Is that a system that you would recommend everybody developing, where they can approve their own holidays, Tony?
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. Brilliant. Yeah. This little indication beside Tony Hughes here is just actually integrating with Microsoft Link. Now, any document or bit of data we put in SharePoint is always tagged against somebody, whether that is, you know, who created it or who last modified it, etc. So if I wanted to come in here, if I've got Link, I can just click that up and say, oh, well, I just want to send an instant message to that person. Okay, I'll find more information about them. So that's just a little example of how SharePoint integrates with other Microsoft applications. I'm just going to do a little refresh here on the screen, and hopefully at the top here now it's saying, right, you've now got 1 day pending, you've only got 24 remaining. That's been achieved in the background by a workflow. So when I submitted my holiday request, the workflow in the background went away and said, well, has Tony got enough holiday to actually, you know, take 1 day? Yes, he has. Right, I'll now create a leave request for approval for his manager, etc., etc. So that just shows some of the process automation. It doesn't have to be a holiday request system. I'll show you one in a few minutes, which is a customer complaint system and how a workflow can manage that. But basically, I can come in here and say, okay, I want to approve that, hit OK. It clears out of me pending annual leave requests, and the workflow will now go away and look at my annual leave and update that accordingly, and also put the entry into the calendar here. Okay, but it's much more than that. Is when I talked earlier on about SharePoint data, okay, this is an example of the Excel on steroids. This is using SharePoint to capture data, and here I'm using it for a staff database. Okay, so I've just got 2 in there. But if I want to say I've got a new member of staff, then what fields do I want to capture? You know, what's his name, what's his address, postcode, job title, what's his login, what's his annual leave entitlement, is he part-time, which office, probation end date, etc., etc. Okay, so we can use SharePoint to build database applications. Another example of that could be training records. Okay, so I want to log a new training record, so we can do lookups. Who is it against? It's against Tony Hughes. What's this again? What's his training? So we can say, right, first aid at work. When did he take it? He took it on the 14th. We'll just copy that and paste it and say, right, well, it expires on 2016, and just log that into the system. But again, we can be clever here. We can have a workflow. As you can see, it's automatically calculated a reminder date. So at that reminder date, we can notify the training manager and say, right, you need to get Tony booked onto another course, etc., etc. Okay, so that's just a little example of how we can use SharePoint to build applications. Okay, but the important thing is that the application is tailored to your needs. You're not buying, for instance, a massive HR system and only using 10% of it. You're developing an application which meets your requirements, but in a way it can be expanded on and built out as we go forward. So I'm just conscious of time. So I'm going to go and I'm going to look at what we're going to look at next week, which is Control Freaks, which is basically around how do we manage documents, how do we manage an ISO process, etc., etc. Okay. Now, things like ISO are not just about managing the documents, it's about, like you say, what we do around that. So here we've just got an example SharePoint site. Again, I'm presenting to the user the approved company's policies and procedures. Here I've got them broken up by different functions. So I'm saying these relate to credit control, these relate to logistics, etc., etc. Now, again, if I want to view one of these, with Office 365 or SharePoint Online, if I just say I want to view a Word document, then it's going to deliver it via the browser. So it's using it's using Word Online. So I could be doing this from an iPad, which hasn't got which hasn't got any Office applications on it. I could even be doing it from a mobile phone, from an Android device, etc., etc.
And the important thing here, Tony, to remember is that Word Online is just available.
Yeah.
You don't have to buy it. It's
No,
just
no.
something that anybody can use.
Yeah, yeah. It just comes as part of the package. Yeah. And in the background, here's how I'm managing these documents. Okay. So I've got things like when's the next review date? What department do they relate to? Who's the document approver? Okay. Is it currently approved? Who's the document owner? So we can tag what's called metadata to document libraries in SharePoint, and that metadata is key to automating the process around those documents. So at the next review date, okay, I might have a workflow which triggers to say, right, I'm going to check this document out to whoever the document owner is, send them an email to say you need to start this process. Once he goes through that review process, I know who the approver is, so I'll automatically notify the approver, and he can then sort of approve or reject, etc., etc. Okay. One other thing we can do with documents inside SharePoint is that I can actually just go to a document and say, okay, right, I want to share this. Okay. And what I'm going to do is just say, right, I want to share this in view only, and I don't want the person to sign in, and I'm going to share it with Stephen. But this could be with anybody. Okay, and I'm just going to say share. And we'll come back to this in a couple of minutes. But what that's going to do is it's going to send a link to Stephen where he can then, via email, click on that and view that document, but view it in a secure way. It will send that document as a non-editable PDF file. So he can't save it and then take my knowledge and my information and do things with it. We mentioned customer complaints before. The Carlsberg effect, I suppose we could call it. So I've just got a little SharePoint list, one of these little database applications in the background here, so called customer complaints. I mean, I could have a button on the home page to launch this, but I'm just doing this straight from the back here. So I can come in here and say, right, well, I want to, we've got a new customer complaint. Right, who's the customer? So we will say, got to be careful here, Acme Inc. All right, who are the contact details? If everyone's ever been on one of my presentations in the past, they'll probably recognize this name as being one of my heroes. So we'll say, and it was Fred Dibner. What was his complaint? So a ladder delivered was broken. We can have different statuses on these. Normally on a solution we would hide this when we create a new form. Ongoing notes and an outcome, but I can also assign it to people. So I can say, well, I want to assign this to Tony Hughes. Okay. Right. So I've just used that to log a complaint. And again, in the background I've got a workflow. Okay. So if I just do a couple of refreshes on this screen, and hopefully it won't take too long, under my open tasks, and hopefully it's going to come through soon. I might have to use the one I used previously in the Blue Peter format. Seems my network connection is a bit slow. Right, what we'll do, I'll use the one which I've previously got here. If I open that, then what the workflow actually did on my previous one from TSG was say, right, I'm going to create a task for you which you need to complete in relation to this customer complaint, and it also gives you a link to the item. So, oh no, I did put customer TSG, Fred Dibner. Okay. So again, that's just a little example of a workflow. Hopefully by the time, there we go. So there it is from Acme. Okay. What we're going to do now is just switch across to Steve's machine just to show you how that document share came across.
Okay, I'm just going to try, I'm hopefully going to make myself a presenter here. So here we go. It looks like I've got an email through from Tony here, so I'm hoping that people can now see this. And if I click on that, then I'm straight through to the document that Tony sent me. Again, I'm in Word Online, so there's no need for me to have that on my desktop if I don't, or I could be on an iPad, as Tony mentioned, or a tablet device or a phone. And so that's come through, and I can. I don't know whether I don't think I've got permission to edit this document, so all I can do is view it. So, hey presto, you've seen again there how we can use SharePoint to kind of work together more effectively. So I am now going to try and make Tony presenter again so we can crack on.
Thanks, Stephen. Okay, so that was just a couple of examples of what we can use SharePoint for. Please have an open mind at this point and think, well, you know, okay, Tony showed me a form for a customer complaint and a form for a holiday request, and in effect a form to create, you know, a staff database and training records. What we're just showing there is using SharePoint as a mechanism to capture data, capture processes, and streamline and automate those processes. Okay, and similar from the document management aspects of it, not all documents in SharePoint require version control, require approval, etc., etc. Okay, we can switch on the functionality as and when required. Okay, so just to finish, first of all, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate your attendance this morning. And we're just going to have one closing slide.
One thing that I did notice when you were on the HR side, Tony, was there was an announcement at the bottom right. So again, you know, SharePoint's had this reputation for being an intranet tool. I know that you've written a blog about that in the past. So yeah. it did have that an announcement. So you could use it for that kind, you know, for that kind of also, you know, Betty, what you refer to the Betty's had a baby approach.
Yeah, Betty's had a baby.
but as you've demonstrated, it does actually do an awful lot more than that.
Oh yeah.
I think hopefully from that, what everybody's got. I've just seen another question come in. So yeah, there's somebody's asked would it be possible to have a copy of this recorded session. I think one person struggled with the audio, which we apologise for. I'm not sure why that would be. Yes, today's session has been recorded. Once we've got it sorted out and edited and uploaded, then we'll make sure that everybody can come back and revisit the session from today. So that absolutely that will happen. I hope that from today's session that you've started to get some ideas. You've started to use that imagination to understand what SharePoint could do within the business. One thing that I would like to ask Tony is you talk about complex solutions, but SharePoint doesn't have to be about massively complex workflow solutions. You can step into it in a fairly simple manner.
Absolutely. I mean, some of our most successful SharePoint implementations have been the smaller projects, which have had a huge effect on the organization. So an example was an organization in Newcastle who have a contract to do all the planned and reactive maintenance for English heritage sites. You know, so somebody might ring up from a castle in the middle of Northumberland and say the gents' toilet's blocked, and they have to react to that. The logging of that data previously was done on Excel. The interaction with the customer and the interaction with their field engineers was done via email or text messages. That's all now done by SharePoint. So they log a request, but because they log the request and they say which region it's in, they know which engineering team to send it to. and it goes out to them, and it's had a huge impact on the business. In fact, English Heritage now rely on this organisation to tell them where they should be at, rather than English Heritage knowing where they are at with the data, because their data is more up to date than English Heritage is.
Excellent.
So we're quite proud of that.
No, that's great. I mean, and we've covered an awful lot today. Sorry, Tony, I've just had another question come in. SharePoint data, I assume, is not stored on premise. Is it a cloud-based application?
It can be either. You can install SharePoint on your physical servers inside your IT infrastructure. In that case, then all the data is physically stored on premise. If you use SharePoint Online or SharePoint as part of Office 365, then obviously all the data is in the cloud.
But again, that data is being in the cloud is incredibly secure. There's, you know.
Oh God, yes, yeah. I mean, Microsoft have signed all the relevant agreements, which basically means that it's data compliant for UK users, and the data will remain in the EU. They won't pass it to our friends across the water.
Great. Another question coming in, can you subscribe to 365 with SharePoint and install it on-premise so that you're paying monthly?
Can you subscribe to 365 with SharePoint and install it on-premise? I don't really understand that.
I think I might be wrong about this. I think the answer to that question is that you wouldn't really, if you were subscribing through Office 365, you wouldn't need to install it on premise.
No.
Yeah.
No. That's right. Yeah.
So it's a service. It's software as a service.
Yeah.
Hopefully that answers the question. It is very flexible, and the SharePoint Online or the Office 365 version subscription makes it affordable in a way that it hasn't previously been affordable, where it's previously been an enterprise only type of product. And that's really the big change, that it is much more accessible and much more affordable to businesses of all sizes.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, SharePoint Online Plan 1 costs £3.10 per user per month, which for the functionality it gives, when you think of the data, the offline capability, you get OneDrive, you get Word Online, Excel Online, PowerPoint Online, multi-device support, iPads, Androids. You know, £3.10 a month is, in my opinion, fantastic value for money. I wish my children's phone bills were so small.
And Office 365 is something that Microsoft are going to continue to push. It is a core, it's a core product for them. What they are also keen to do is, where Microsoft Office 365 has been taken on, which typically in a lot of organizations is around Exchange and email, they're actually trying to encourage, and they're having a real push to encourage users and businesses to adopt the other elements of Office 365, of which SharePoint is one. Because that way you get the most of your investment or your spend on Office 365. So thanks again, Tony. That was tremendous, and probably a bit longer than we'd anticipated, but I think an awful lot to take in, but really just a taster, because the next 4 sessions we'll go into more depth and more detail. As you'll see on screen, SharePoint is applicable right the way across the business, right the way across the organization. So hopefully you will have identified a couple of ideas, a couple of projects, and get your colleagues involved, because I do hope that if you can get your colleagues involved and they can see the kind of thing that SharePoint can do for them, that they will be as enthusiastic as you are, and as enthusiastic as Tony clearly is about what is a very exciting product. Once you get past the fact that it's not about technology, it's about the business processes, it's back to those 3 I's. So it's, what are your issues? Use your imagination to understand how that fits within the business, and strive for improvement. And if you keep that in mind, then I'm sure that you will have a long and happy and successful relationship with SharePoint.
Register for free at tsg.com/events. Thanks for watching.